Welcome to the Flight Club Podcast, a woman's guide to leaning out. We give you a behind-the-scenes look at business launch and growth through the stories of successful female entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Felina Hansen, founder and CEO of Hera Hub.
Hello and welcome. I'm excited for my conversation today with Julie Shen. She is the founder of Springstead, an advisory and consultancy practice that works with purpose-driven founders, businesses, and organizations to develop, launch, and grow their initiatives. Springstead turns ideas into results through strategy, business development, project execution, and capital opportunities. She has a really amazing background. I'm excited to share all the really cool companies that she's worked with, 15 years of experience, both incubating, developing, launching new businesses, not only for startups, but also big companies like Condé Nast and HBO. She is passionate about supporting female entrepreneurs and facilitating an environment for them to flourish in, which we definitely share that passion. So welcome to the show today, Julie.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
I am excited to talk about some of these really cool companies you worked for. We don't always see some of these big names, so to speak. And I know you started off your career in the practice of big consulting firms at Pricewaterhouse. But before we dive into your career path, I know you are a New York City girl, true and true, right?
That is correct.
Awesome. Talk about, before you stepped off into your career path, your educational choice. Where did you go to school?
Yes. So I grew up in New York, as you mentioned, and I went to Bronx High School of Science for high school. And at the time, I was living with my parents in Flushing, Queens. So commuting to the Bronx every day as a high schooler, as a teenager was significant. It was a lot, and it definitely makes you grow up. And I think, a lot of New York City kids can relate to this, right? The ability to take the subway for an hour and a half commute each way at the age of 16, at the age of 15, it really matures you and makes you very responsible for yourself. And so, yeah, I did that for 4 years, and it was such a great just institutional education. And then from there, I went to Binghamton University for college. Growing up, my parents were immigrants, and so we did not have a lot of money. So a big decision that went into, our education choice was the fact if we could afford it, if we had to take out loans and etc. And I am a huge proponent of state schools because I think they can provide such great education for not a significant sum of money. And I don't believe that good education has to be so incredibly expensive to the point where you can't afford it. So I went to SUNY Binghamton, as it was previously called, but now it's called Binghamton University. And I studied business administration and finance and accounting.
Awesome. And I want to underline some of the things that you said, Julie, because it's so incredibly important. Number one, yes to allowing kids to explore the world on their own, build some grit, right? I mean, don't even get me started on that whole topic. But I love what you said about, your college choice. I started off actually going to community college for 2 years because I wasn't that A student in high school, and it was the best decision I ever made. And you're right. I mean, especially now there's all kinds of conversations around, is college even worth it anymore? And what does it actually do? And these poor kids, they get out with, $100,000 in debt. Like, can't even imagine starting my life with that.
Exactly. I really do believe in the value of education as as a Chinese American, as a child to immigrant parents, education and profession is something that's really important in our culture. So I do believe in the value of education. I just don't think education needs to be so expensive that you have to take on significant debt to be able to afford it. And I believe everyone should have access to right education, and they should assess the money that they put into this education as the return on investment, right? So if you come out of school, to your point, with $100,000 in debt, how long will it take in your profession that you choose to work that off? And is it really worth that specific education from that specific college? Or is there something else that you can do? Is there another place that you can go where you can evaluate all of your options? So I totally agree with you there.
Awesome. All right. We could talk days on this, but let's get into your career path. So did you start at PwC?
I did. So right out of college, I started at PwC and I worked there for 2 years, and we were in the consultancy group, and it was called consumer finance at the time. So I was 22 years old, traveling to on-site with clients. And if you've ever been a consultant, or if anyone here as a listener has been a consultant, you know what that life is like. So Monday mornings, you are commuting to your client site, and that could be very far away. So at the time I was commuting from New York to Los Angeles. So that meant that I was on the first flight out on Monday mornings. That's usually around 6:30 p.m. I'm sorry, 6:30 a.m. flying out of JFK. And then you take the red eye back on Thursday evenings, and you work from home on Fridays. So that was my life for almost 2 years, but it was amazing experience because it really built in this behavior of rigor and schedule and consistency in your routine.
Yeah. And I'm sure you learned a ton.
Yeah. I did a lot of financial modeling then, which, I would not be too upset if I didn't have to go back.
I understand. Awesome. Okay. So then what took you over to HBO?
Yeah, I was burnt out, truthfully.
Mm-hmm.
Now that sounds a little silly, being 24 years old and burnt out, but when you're traveling every week for 52 weeks, it's a lot, and at first it was extremely exciting to have miles and to be a Sky Miles member as a 20-something-year-old, but eventually that wears off and you just want some kind of a sense of normalcy and a sense of being almost like a kid again, right? So I decided that I wanted to transition from consultancy to going in-house, and I wanted to leverage my financial skills into something more strategic. So I joined HBO in the strategic planning and finance department as an associate and analyst. And it was fantastic because it was taking something that was very technical and then now leveraging that to being more strategic about how you can serve, the organization that you work for or the projects that you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. You must have seen all kinds of really interesting things in your 8 years there.
Oh yeah, I moved around a bit actually. So I started in the financial planning group, and then from there I moved into a more front-facing business development role. And so what was cool was that in my original role in planning, we were looking at how we can bring, at the time, HBO was a traditional TV network, right? It did not go what we would call over the top. You could not subscribe to HBO directly like you could now and like you could with Netflix. So previously, 15 years ago, the only way to get HBO was through the cable box.
Mhm.
And my team was really responsible for looking at what does this digital disruption means for us and how can we continue to evolve in an ecosystem that is evolving so fast. So we were always looking at new lines of business, especially within the digital arena, that we should be investing in. And so a lot of that meant, what does it mean for HBO to cut the cord and take and launch a service that is more direct to consumer? So we did a lot of strategic analysis and marketplace assessment and planning around that initiative. And then I was able to join the team that actually launched that initiative when HBO launched its first D2C service. And I was on the BD team to actually manage that part of the business, to look at subscription optimization for the first time in the history of HBO. And then also to execute a lot of these big deals and partnerships with the players like Sony PlayStation and Google Chromecast. So it was an incredible stretch of 8 years where I got to flex a lot of different muscles and be on both the strategic planning side as well as the business management side and the business development side to actually execute against those plans.
That is amazing. Yeah, it was such a big shift. I mean, you were right in the middle because all these networks were trying to figure out what was next. A really interesting time. And it looks like you took some of that work over to Condé Nast. You were there for 5 or so years.
Exactly. So I had spent, at that time, I had spent 8 years at HBO, and it was such an incredible ride. But eventually, you start to feel a little tapped out and you do want to stretch your wings in different directions. And so one of my ex-colleagues at HBO had joined Condé Nast on their digital team. And at the time, similar to HBO, Condé Nast was also going through a transformation from being known as a traditional publisher to a multimedia modern day conglomerate. So I joined the digital team to help usher various brands and the corporation itself into the digital era. So it was really nice to be able to import and transport some of the skill sets into an adjacent industry, because while we were still in media, digital video and social media and print is very different than a premium subscription service. So I joined the team to, similar to HBO, look at different arenas that we should be evolving in, where we can expand audience, where we can expand brand, and strike some strategic partnerships to allow us to pilot new initiatives in new industries. And then eventually, I ultimately went on to actually launch one of those initiatives in a GM role.
So, yeah, I mean, so much that you saw in the transformation of both of these industries. I mean, when they're still, changing and evolving, it's change or die, especially in these segments.
Yeah, it's true. Oftentimes there is really no sleep for any brand, because just as soon as you've gotten to a place of comfort, you need to be looking for that next area, that next initiative for you to be expanding, because the landscape is always changing. There's always new competition coming out, both big and small. So it is really up to the brand and their teams to ensure that they're keeping up with transformation that's happening across all industries.
Absolutely. I want to move to your business, of course, and that decision to leave, these very well-known large companies to launch your own business. But before we move to that, and I also want to talk about some of your travels, which sound exciting.
Yeah.
What do you see, if you were pulled back into Condé Nast and HBO and some of these other clients, and maybe these are some of the companies you're currently working with your own business, what would your advice be to them, given first we had Instagram Reels and content creation, and that went, kind of pulled away the eyeballs, right? This is all eyeballs, whether it's TV or print or web or whatever, it's all eyeballs. And then now, of course, the rise of TikTok specifically. What would your advice be to some of these companies around engaging content creators and trying to steal back some of those eyeballs?
Oh, what a great question. I think there's not a one size fits all, and it really depends on what your company's values are and what the mission is. What we've seen work really well is if you are a small brand, you lean into what makes a small brand amazing to its consumers and communities versus trying to compete with a really big brand. And so kind of like knowing what your lane is and where you have the permission to win and really focusing and doubling down on that. So for example, smaller brands have the opportunity to really create a dynamic and engaging community because they're so close to every one of their consumers. Bigger brands don't have the opportunity to do that because they are just too polished, they are too corporate and they're too far removed from their everyday consumers on a corporate level. And so I think when you compare the two, the smaller brands really have this like edge against the incumbents. And this edge is literally what gives them that leg up. And so really understanding what your consumers want, what is driving their behavior, and what do they want to see from you in terms of rewards and perks, right? Some consumers are really into experiences and being part of the brand. Some consumers are really into discounts and promos and feeling like they got free stuff. So it's really about knowing what your specific consumers want and building out, rewards and programs and engagement that is tailored for them, that speaks to them, and ensuring that you are creating a dialogue not only between you and your consumers, but between your consumers with each other, because that horizontal stitching and emotional connection between your consumers is what is going to create the foundation of your community. Oftentimes we talk about community, and that's a very hot word. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't actually understand what it means, and everyone wants a crack at community, but very, very few brands do it well. So I think it takes a lot of listening, active listening, and then a lot of optimization and review of your own business practices so you can implement the input and the feedback that you've heard from your consumers and your community into the day-to-day operations of your business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody who does run a true community of about 500 women across the US, I concur with everything you're saying. I mean, it takes a lot of work. We're constantly listening. I mean, we truly listening. So it is a lot easier for a smaller organization to do that.
Yeah. I want to ask you, I'm sorry to interject.
No, please. Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you what you're seeing within your communities, because to your point, you guys have built such amazing, immense, engaged communities. So what has worked really well for your strategies and operations?
Yeah, it's being in front of your customer every single day. As we come out of the pandemic, there's a lot of fatigue around some of the channels that we've been on. And so, I run a physical co-working space, and we also do a lot of education and mentoring and business acceleration. But, it's a daily practice of just bringing people in, getting in front of them, providing them value, asking them what they need. It's a lot of work. And I think that's why a lot of people say they build community, but at the end of the day, it's a heavy lift. And I think some of these bigger publications like HBO and Condé Nast and so on, it is going to, I mean, you have been through this massive wave of change, and you've seen that in the industry. And I think that the next wave will be, how can these big brands, and some of them are already doing it, harness some of these content creators that, are now influencers and some of these things. Because if they ignore that, if they continue to ignore that, they're losing eyeballs every day. The next generation is not dialing into like a physical television. Like, I never turn on my TV, and I'm not the next generation. I'm 49 years old, but I like literally never turn on the physical television. I watch everything on YouTube. And so these brands really, I think they still have a lot of work to do to continue to evolve. So I want to get to your eat, pray, love adventures and then get into your business. So you took 9 months to travel the world. Give us a couple of the highlights.
Oh my gosh. Can I just tell you, I never thought I would ever have the opportunity to do something like that. It goes back to what I was telling you before. In my head, I don't know why I thought this. I think it's an immigrant mentality where I just thought I would be working until I retired, which now that I am a wiser, that sounds so silly, but when you don't think about it, you just continue to climb the corporate ladder. And so I never thought I would be in a position where I had the opportunity to take a sabbatical. And I am a huge advocate for anyone who has the means and can, manage their finances to figure out a way to take that sabbatical, because it doesn't make sense and it's not sustainable for us to be continuously working and grinding, not only in a corporate role, but in any role, in anything that we want to do in our career consistently, right? So we need to, we are a living and breathing thing. And so as much as we expand, we also need to think about a period of contraction and just coming back to what makes us who we are and what we really value and take joy in. And so the 9 months that we had off, and my husband, we were lucky because we ended up being really in sync with our time. He was also taking a sabbatical and I was taking a sabbatical. And so we ended up traveling the world, and it was fantastic, to wake up every day and not have an agenda. As someone who comes from a very strict corporate background, as someone who was an ex-consultant where time, scope, and budget is everything, I didn't realize how much I would enjoy the fluidity and the flexibility of not having an agenda. I thought I would be bored, and I was not bored once. So, we traveled across various regions in Europe, across Italy and France, in many, many different regions within those countries. And we are huge art and food and wine lovers. So we ate and we cooked and we studied wine and champagne. And we really got to immerse ourselves with art history and Renaissance art, which is where both of our passions lie. And when I came back to New York, I had never felt as energized, as replenished as I did after taking that sabbatical.
I bet. How amazing. As you talked about that, I'm like, I want to do that.
Have you ever taken a sabbatical?
No, I work like crazy. I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years, Julie. I work like crazy. Although I build it into my business.
Right.
So we do an annual strategic planning retreat with just a handful of my members every year. And we've been to Greece and Sweden. We're going to the south of Italy this year. So people talk a lot about work-life balance. And for me, I talk about work-life integration instead. And so I love wine, I love dancing, I love travel. And so I have like figured a way how to just like blend all that into my business. So
Oh my gosh, yes. The word work-life integration means so much to me. And I am a huge believer of what you just said, which is like when we talk about balance, it still means that work and life are at opposite end of the
yes,
spectrum, and
yes.
you're constantly trying to balance the two, but they're still in opposition of each other, right? Versus integration is when they dance and intertwine together beautifully. And that is the sort of life that I seek. And so that sounds really, really lovely.
Exactly. So let's get into your business. You launched about 6 months ago. Springstead.co is your website. Talk about some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah. So I'll just quickly say the reason why I decided to leave corporate and launch my own practice was because I got to a point where building businesses for large organizations no longer felt serving to me, no longer felt purposeful. And I, like a lot of people during the pandemic, was just overworked, exhausted, and I was burnt out again, and I really had to make a life change. And at the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just know what I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
So after the sabbatical, I came back very, very clear-minded, and I had this goal of working directly with female founders and consumer businesses in early and mid stage, in their mid stages, and bringing that level of expertise of business building, but to a more purpose-driven and more smaller organization. And so I am now working with a portfolio of female founders and brands, all of whom I admire extremely, and all of the businesses that they run and have launched are businesses that fall within the beauty and wellness sectors. So they're all businesses that I really gravitate towards and that I actually use as a consumer. That was something that was really important to me. Is I decided that if I were to leave corporate and take this jump, I wanted to work on projects that I felt really passionate about, and in businesses and brands that I actually am a consumer for, because no one will be more passionate and more driven to make that brand a success than the admirers and the super fans of that brand, and of course the founders themselves.
Absolutely. What is one brand that you're working with right now that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, I have a few brands, and I generally don't always like to name them because we're in the middle of our projects. However,
Okay.
I will
Sure.
name this brand because we've been very vocal in social about my support of that brand, and it's not a secret. But one of my brands that I work really deeply with, it's called Pretty Well Beauty. So Pretty Well Beauty is a retailer that curates clean beauty and wellness and skincare brands, but with the highest standards of clean. And the packaging is sustainable, and they have standards for making sure that the ingredients are also consciously sourced. So I've been working really closely with our founder, Jasmine, on building and scaling the business in creative ways. So really leaning into experiential and activations as well as strategic partnerships.
Awesome. I love it. Wonderful. And what's something that you're working on for your business? Maybe a new service or something new that you're excited about?
Oh, great question. I think what I'm excited about for my business in the future is diversification. So I really want the business to not only have a diversified portfolio of founders and different lines of businesses, but also the ways that we can support founders. And I want to be able to support founders not only through consulting and advisory, but also through capital infusion when appropriate.
Absolutely. And it's such disparity in the amounts of money that women receive on the equity side as opposed to male-run companies. So lots of work to do there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Julie, if our listeners want to reach out to you, they want to connect with you, learn more about you, where is the best place to do that?
So I would love for anyone to reach out to me if anyone ever wants to just pick my brain and talk shop. There's nothing, I thrive in more. So they can definitely find me on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is Springstead. So spring and then STEAD_CO.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Julie. I've really had fun chatting with you.
Thank you, Felina. This was a pleasure and such a just what I needed. And I didn't even realize I needed it during the midday that I was having. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Flight Club, sponsored by Hera Hub. We look forward to sharing more success stories with you soon.